and it was really the first time that white America witnessed this. More than 3,000 demonstrators were arrested, including King and several white ministers, both men and women, who were rushing to the cause of civil rights. While in jail, King was inspired to write a letter from Birmingham jail, which is a defense of nonviolent civil disobedience that has become a classic document of the civil rights movement. So King preached to his supporters by stating that one who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with willingness to accept the penalty. Also in a reference to President Kennedy's timid support, King wrote that the most threatening foe of equal justice was not the Southern white bigot, but the, quote, white male moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who constantly says, I agree with you and the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods, end quote. King's efforts prevailed when Birmingham officials finally agreed to end their segregationist policies and practices. Furthermore, Kennedy finally decided he needed to take the lead on civil rights. He announced that he would soon submit to Congress a major new civil rights bill that would remove race as a consideration in American life and law. This would become the landmark Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Kennedy would tragically not live to see enacted. Southern Democrats in the House of Representatives would block Kennedy's civil rights bill for months. As a result of this standoff in Congress, Black American leaders decided to take a bold step. On August 28th, some 2,500,000 blacks and whites, brought in on buses, marched arm in arm down the mall in Washington, D.C. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was the largest political demonstration in American history. Prominent entertainers sang protest songs, and civil rights activists gave speeches calling for racial justice. And it is in this event that King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. So here we see photos from Birmingham, as well as Martin Luther King Jr. in Birmingham jail. And this was really, as I mentioned, the first time that Americans all across the country and white Americans really saw this racial violence happening. So during late 1963 and throughout 1964, the civil rights movement grew in scope, visibility, and power. Following Kennedy's assassination in late 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson coordinated a bipartisan coalition in the Senate and passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The law prohibited discrimination in public accommodations, increased federal enforcement of school desegregation and the right to vote, and created the Community Relations Service, a federal agency authorized to help resolve racial conflicts. The act also contained a final measure to combat employment discrimination on the basis of race and sex. Yet even as President Johnson signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act into law on July 2nd, Black Freedom Forces launched a new offensive to secure the right to vote in the South. So racism remained entrenched in the Lower South, and Black folks continued to be excluded from the political process. The 1964 Act contained a voting rights provision, but it did little to address the main problems of the discriminatory use of literacy tests and poll taxes, and the biased administration of voter registration procedures that kept the majority of Southern Black Americans from voting. White officials kept Black Americans from voting by continuing to charge them expensive poll taxes, forcing them to take difficult literacy tests, making the application process inconvenient, and intimidating them through the use of arson, beatings, and lynchings. In early 1964, Harvard-educated Robert Moses, a Black New Yorker who headed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee office in Mississippi, set about recruiting an army of Black and white volunteers who would live with rural Black Americans, provide them an education in freedom schools, and help them register to vote. Most of the recruits who came to be called the Freedom Summer were idealistic white college students, many of whom were Jewish. And because of the high rate of participation by Jewish college students, Mississippi's white leaders termed this movement the N-word communist invasion. So it's easy for us to see where modern-day white supremacist movements get both their KKK character and their neo-Nazi character from. Hitler conformed to the racist conspiracy theory that all Jews were communist and that communism was a global Jewish conspiracy. So the combination of Jewish social justice advocates and Black American challenges to white supremacy was a very powerful image. And you can see how these tensions have continued through until our present day. White Southerners prepared for the event by doubling the state police force and stockpiling tear gas, electric cattle prods, and shotguns. Despite the promise of resistance, the student volunteers fanned out across the South. In all, 41 freedom schools taught thousands of children math, writing, and history, and they also tutored Black adults about the complicated process of voter registration. In response, the KKK, the local police, and other white racists harassed, arrested, and assaulted many of the volunteers. In June of 1964, Klan members abducted and murdered 3 young civil rights freedom workers. Their decomposed bodies were found 2 months later in a cattle pond. And while searching for the missing men, authorities found the bodies of 8 Black men in rivers and swamps, a testament to the startling amount of racial violence. As the momentum of the civil rights movement grew, so did the white violence against it. So Freedom Summer highlighted the problem of disenfranchisement, but it took further demonstrations in Selma, Alabama to resolve it. After state troopers shot and killed a Black voting rights demonstrator in February of 1965, King called for a march from Selma to the capital of Montgomery to petition Alabama Governor George Wallace to end the violence and allow Black Americans to vote. In a familiar scene, law enforcement officials answered their peaceful protests with arrests and beatings. Events in Selma prompted President Johnson to take action. On March 15th, he addressed a joint session of Congress and told lawmakers and a nationally televised audience that the Black cause must be our own cause too, because it is not just Negroes, but really it is all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, end quote. On August 6, 1965, the president signed the Voting Rights Act, which banned the use of literacy tests for voter registration